Hello everybody, my name is MollyKate. I'm a fashion designer and I make creative content here on YouTube. Today I'm going to be telling you the 10 steps you need in order to make your own wedding dress. So I've packed everything that I know from personal experience into this video. I truly believe this is the only video you need. If you find today's video helpful, please let me know by hitting the subscribe button and commenting down below. So without wasting any time, let's get into it. Here's step number one. Step number one is to figure out your why and commit. I'm here to tell you that this is a huge commitment that you might not fully realize until you're in the thick of it. So I'm here to tell you now, there are good reasons and not so good reasons. You're probably thinking of making your wedding dress, and it's important to sit down, really think about your why, and then decide if this is truly what you want to move forward with. And if it is, then fully commit. So an example of a good reason why you might be wanting to make your wedding dress would be if you've always dreamt of making your wedding dress and you know that it's in the realm of possibility for you. What I mean by that is you already know how to sew, you already have a strong vision for your dress, and you know you have the time frame for it. If those three things are true, then I say go for it. But an example of a not so good reason to sew your dress would be if you're looking to save money, because I truly believe that is just not the case here. Especially nowadays, there are so many good places out there to find wedding dresses on a budget that truly buying fabric, materials, everything that goes into making a wedding dress, truly at the end of the day, is more expensive than you realize. So if that's why you want to do this, I say think again. Step number two is to figure out your timeline. So before you even start planning out your dress, it's important to know how much time you're working with. So you could have a 2-year-long engagement, you could have an engagement that lasts 3 months. This is why it is so important that you know how much time you'll actually have to make your dress. Remember that at this same time, you'll also be planning your wedding. So you will have a lot going on and you want to make sure that there's enough time allotted to make your dress. Personally, I feel like if your engagement is any shorter than 6 months, this might be really tricky, but you know what? It all depends on your skill set and how motivated you are, and don't let that scare you. I just want to prepare you that making your own dress will take longer than you anticipate. You will go through multiple mock-ups, multiple pattern tweaks, a lot of adjustments, lots of fittings, so you want to cushion in extra time. Like, I would say at least 2 months, okay? So if you're like, okay, my dress needs to be done by May, tell yourself it needs to be done by March. Another little tip I want to add in here is that if your engagement is on the longer side, ours personally was 2 years long because of the pandemic, then you'll want to account for weight fluctuations. So I know a lot of people want to lose weight leading up to the wedding, but in my situation, I actually put on weight before the wedding. Again, COVID bride, staying home in quarantine. And so I did have to adjust my pattern pieces as I was working on my dress and make them bigger. So that's something that if you have a longer engagement, make sure you're trying your dress on the whole time and adjust as needed. I truly think that knowing your timeline is honestly more important than budget. But that's step three. So step three is to figure out your total wedding dress budget. Whatever this number is, please know that you might want to add a little cushion on top of this because there will be extra expenses that you just don't think of, okay? So for example, when it came to my dress, I bought foam cups, and it wasn't until I started sewing with them that I realized I don't like these foam cups, they're too padded, I don't want any padding in my cups. So I decided to go back to the store, buy sheets of foam, and sew my own cups. That was an adventure. This was an unexpected cost. Yeah, it didn't cost a lot. A sheet of foam is like under $10, but silly little example. That's just an example of how you'll want to budget in some extra money and really just make sure to stay true to your budget. That's just a general tip for wedding planning in general. It is very easy to get carried away, but as long as you make a list and stay reasonable, you can do it. Step number 4, and now we're getting into the good stuff, is to research and pick out your silhouette. So this is basically just the shape of your dress. And for me personally, I've always known that I wanted a ball gown style. Honestly, probably since I was like 6 years old, that has never wavered. So if you're anything like me, this step might already be done for you. You might have a crystal clear vision of what shape dress you're looking for. But if you don't, and you're not sure, I recommend not only going online, going on Pinterest, going on Instagram, and looking at all the options out there: mermaid, trumpet, ball gown, A-line, so many choices. I also recommend going to your local bridal shop and trying on dresses. Let me tell you, worst thing that could happen is you fall in love with a dress, you don't want to take it off, and sweetheart, congratulations! You found your wedding dress and don't need to sew one yourself. That's like extreme case what could happen. What also could happen is you just figure out what silhouette you like, and then you go home and you're like, sweet, now I can move on to the next step. I actually used to be a bridal consultant, and there were some girls that walked in and ended up buying the very first dress that they put on. They knew exactly what they were looking for and fell in love with it. And there were some girls that came in thinking they knew exactly what they wanted, but ended up leaving with a dress completely different than what they thought. So that's the reason why I encourage you to go try on dresses, because I would hate if you started sewing a mermaid dress and then tried it on and you just weren't falling in love with it, and then you realize months before the wedding that you actually want a ball gown. So go try on some dresses, figure out the shape that you're going for, and then we're on to step 5. Step number 5, now that you have your silhouette picked out, it's time to pick out fabric. So before you start buying fabric, it's important that you go online and just find some swatches. So my favorite places to buy bridal fabric online would be Dharma Trading Co. and Etsy. So I've been using Dharma since fashion design school, and they're known for a lot of white, ivory, off-white, just nice, solid, basic fabrics, a lot of silk satins, charmeuses, that type of thing. And they actually allow swatches that are like, I think 3 by 3 inches for 25 cents. So I recommend getting, honestly, as many as you can. And then once they get in, you can start layering them on top of each other and figuring out what you like and what fits your vision of the silhouette you picked out. Maybe at this point you already have your design sketched out, whether it's just a little napkin sketch or you decide to go all crazy with colored pencils and markers. And honestly, I don't even know that I sketched my dress that well ever. I think it was always just in my head and maybe like a scribble on a piece of paper. But regardless, start ordering your swatches. My all-time favorite place other than Dharma is Etsy, because you can contact the seller if they don't have an option to get fabric swatches and just let them know that you just need a really small cutting, and most of the time they have no problem sending you an inch or two of fabric. So what's really nice about Etsy is that they have a lot of really unique bridal fabrics that I don't see in some mainline fabric stores and bridal shops in general. Also, a lot of Etsy sellers are from overseas, they're international, and for example, some of my fabric came from Germany, and it's just really cool to get really cool fabrics that you can't always find in person. So I do not recommend shopping for bridal fabric in person. Chances are if you are shopping in person, it will be very expensive. And I think you will have better luck shopping for fabric online. Just make sure you buy swatches first. The second step to buying fabric is once you have your swatches and you selected which ones you want to move forward with, I then recommend not ordering a ton, but ordering half a yard of each fabric, because we're working up to it, okay? This is why that timeline is so important, and the longer timeline you have, the more time you have to order multiple times of fabric, if that makes sense. So I got swatches first, and then I started to order half a yard cuttings so I could drape it on my dress form and figure out how it lays, how it flows. Sometimes it's a little tricky to see based off swatches. So once you have your half yard cuttings, if you're still in love with it and you're like, yep, this is go time, then you can purchase your final fabric, okay? But we're not gonna jump into final fabric right away. Also, before you buy your final fabric, you will also need to buy practice fabric, aka muslin or similar fabric to make your mock-ups with. So I recommend getting a bolt of muslin. This is usually what's used to practice making your bodice. And then for your skirt fabric, chances are if you have a design that has like a flowier skirt, you're just going to want to use a similar fabric to that that isn't as expensive. So you can go to a craft store, find a really cheap poly chiffon, and use that as your mock-up fabric, because you're gonna want your practice mock-ups to be as similar to your final fabric as possible. But when it comes time to make your final dress, you're only gonna cut it and sew it once. It's gonna be perfect by then. So I had 6 rounds of mock-ups before I cut my final fabric. Okay, y'all, step number 6 is to sketch out your design and figure out your pattern pieces. So once you have your sketch, and again, this can be like super rough on a napkin, whatever, you're going to want to look at it and you're going to analyze exactly what pattern pieces you need. So for example, for my wedding dress, I obviously knew that I would need a sleeve pattern. These are sleeves that I have made many times before, so that was no issue for me. I already had a pattern for these and knew how to make these sleeves. And then I also knew that I would need some elastic to make these sleeves. There's elastic at both the top here and as well as the wrist. So then I would just write down 1/2 inch elastic. And then I would move over to my bodice. What I'm doing here is figuring out what pattern pieces I need and then taking note of any notions, that means zippers, elastic, thread, etc., that those pattern pieces require along the way. Keeping a list of all those notions is key so that you know exactly all the materials that you need. So in the corporate world, we call that a BOM, or a bill of materials, and it's literally a document that has all the notions, all the thread, all the zippers, all the embellishments, all the everything, and it is a document that specifies placement of each of these things. So like zipper at the center back, and they send this along to the factory, and that's how the factory knows exactly where to put every item. So make your own little bill of materials. It will help you as you are planning out your pattern pieces. So for example, when I was making my bustier top, which guys, this is probably like the most complicated top that you could make for a wedding dress. So I really just did not go easy on myself. But what I learned that I needed here for my bustier top would be the cups, which started out as foam cups, but then I bought foam to make my own cups. I needed the boning pieces to go in the seams. I knew I needed the fashion fabric, so my main fabric on the outside, and then also a fabric lining on the inside. I used a soft tricot so it wouldn't be scratchy. I knew I wanted a zipper at the center back because I didn't want to do a corset back. I didn't want hook and eyes. So took note that I needed a zipper. And then as far as the actual bustier goes, I knew I needed a front bodice, front side bodice, side back bodice, and back bodice. So I'm just writing down all my pattern pieces, and then I was on to planning my pattern pieces for my skirt. So for my skirt, I wanted a ball gown, so I knew that this needed a lot of fullness. So in order to make my ball gown, I knew that I needed multiple panels on my skirt. If I were making a skirt that wasn't super full, then usually what I would do is just have one piece in the front and then 2 panels in the back with the zipper at the center back. But in this case, I had like 6 panels because I wanted fullness. So just really sit and think about how full you want your skirt to be and how many panels that will need. This is also how you'll figure out how much fabric you need. And then you're gonna want to decide if you are going to make all of these pattern pieces or buy them. Personally, there is absolutely nothing wrong with buying pattern pieces. I recommend buying pattern pieces if you've never pattern drafted before. I have been sewing for a long time and went to fashion design school, so I did make my own pattern pieces. But again, if that's something that you haven't done before, you do not need to do that here. Trust me, it still counts as making your own wedding dress if you end up buying a pattern piece. It could also work out that you're like, hey, I don't know how to make this bustier top. I'm gonna buy a pattern to make the bustier top, and then I'm going to pattern draft the skirt on my own. Then that's great. You can mix and match and make pattern pieces for some parts and buy pattern pieces for other parts. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I recommend just going even to Joann Fabrics. They have a huge arsenal of bridal patterns. There's also vintage Vogue patterns that are really, really beautiful for wedding dresses, and a huge arsenal online of patterns available if you just search in wedding dress patterns. It doesn't even have to be wedding dress patterns. It could just be dress patterns, skirt patterns, sleeve patterns. Look for the exact piece that you need, even if there's only a couple aspects of the design that you need. You don't need to use the whole pattern, okay? If there's a dress that has the sleeve you want, then buy the pattern. You don't need to use the dress portion of the pattern, just use the pattern for the sleeve, and then just take that, okay? So just mix and match. A tip that I have for making a train is that it's actually not as hard as you might think it is. This is something that I learned to make in fashion design school. Basically, when you're making your skirt, you're going to want your side seam to be the total length of how long you want your dress to be, okay? So your side seam length might be 60 inches. Obviously, this includes heel height, so make sure you have your heels picked out this whole time, because you're going to want to make sure you're hemming your dress to your heels. And then you're going to want to measure how long you want your train to be. Like if you want this to be like freaking at the back of the room, then take a yardstick or like 5 and measure how long that number is, and that's gonna be the length of your center back seam, okay? So it's literally gonna be center back seam, side seam, and then you're gonna curve and connect those dots. And that's how you make a train. It's literally that simple. Next up, step number 8 is to start sewing your mock-ups. So even if your final fabric has come in the mail, set that aside. You are not touching that yet. Just get out your practice fabric, your muslin, the cheap tulle, cheap chiffon, whatever you have to practice with, and it's time to start practicing. This might take you many times, and that's okay. Remember, this is a fun process. You're coming back to this as you can over the months. You're not in a rush. You're not leaving this to the last minute. You're enjoying your life, planning your wedding, and coming back to practice your sewing mock-ups as you can. Again, it took me 6 times to make my bodice, and there were many times I walked away from it and came back. So my tips here for sewing your very first mock-ups is that when you try it on, it is not going to fit the very first time. Make sure to have somebody help you, or if you can, just by yourself in the mirror, mark with an invisible marker, like one that washes off, or just use a pen, it's practice fabric, where you need to adjust. And then don't be afraid once you take it off just to cut and try it again. This process is where you learn. This is your time to just figure out how you want to finish all of your seams. If you want to try to do a French seam so it can be nice and crisp, both not only on the outside but on the inside of the garment, then practice making French seams. This is where you will experiment with if you want to serge the inside of your dress. When making a garment, I recommend that you always serge the inside or have some sort of finishing for the seams on the inside, especially if this is a garment that you're gonna sell. You would definitely want all the seams to be finished and have no raw edges on the inside, because you put it in the washer and then it can fray, and that's just not cute. But I will say, since this is a one-time dress, this is not something you're gonna sell, this is not something for your online shop, this is not a homework assignment, you can get away with leaving some raw edges inside. There, I said it. If you absolutely need to, do not worry the most about making sure all your seams on the inside are impeccable. At the end of the day, you're going to wear this dress once and it's not going to go in the wash, so you can wear it again another time for the most part. So I personally would not worry a ton if your seams aren't finished on the inside, but I do recommend that you try to finish them, even if you use pinking shears, and just snip whatever you can't figure out how to serge or seam nicely on the inside. Whatever you can do to make sure that your edges are as clean as possible will be best before you move over to your final fabric. If this is something that you plan to keep in the family for a while, you want your kids to have as a family heirloom, I recommend you just put in the extra effort to make sure all your seams are finished on the inside, and it's just the correct thing to do, you know? I will say some fabrics don't need finished or hemmed. For example, a lot of tulle you can have be the raw edge because it won't fray. So definitely research what fabrics need to be hemmed or not hemmed. Like if you have a really soft mesh, you might not need to hem that, because if you do, it might be too bulky. But if you have a satin or chiffon, you're definitely gonna want to hem that, and you're probably going to want to use like a really small serger hem on that so that you don't see like a thick hem. And there are tons of sewing feet that you can get on your sewing machine, like a roll hem foot that just hems it for you. Step number 9 is to sew your final garment. And this part should be a breeze. You've already sewn this a million times at this point. So this is what my sewing professor used to mean by sewing is 80% pattern work and 20% sewing. I don't think I fully realized that until I made my wedding dress. But at this point, you've already practiced making this dress so many times that you know when you cut this final fabric that it is good to go. This will fit you to a T, and that's honestly the best feeling. So before you dive into cutting out your final fabric, I do recommend cutting out a small square, maybe like 10 inches by 10 inches, and practice sewing a couple seams. You'll want to do this because you want to make sure that your needle you're using is correct. Make sure that the gauge isn't too big, and so you don't puncture holes in your final fabric. That's especially true like if you're using lightweight silks. So just test it before you start sewing on the final pattern pieces. And honestly, just take your time sewing this last round of your dress. Soak it all in, because before you know it, it'll be time for step 10. Step number 10 is to put on any finishing touches and to do your final fitting. So at this point, you're gonna wanna ask yourself, okay, did anything go wrong when moving from my practice fabric to my final fabric? Is it puckering now? Are there any like misalignments? Like, did anything go wrong? Hopefully it didn't. And what you'll wanna do is fix any of those corrections. I honestly think at this point, the biggest problem that you might see is some puckering, because depending on how your new fabric reacted to the needle you used, you might see a little bit of puckering. But if that's the case, then just make sure you steam it out. If you don't have a steamer, just get an iron that has a steamer function, and you want to make sure to press open all of your seams. So that will help make your dress look super crisp, super nice. I also recommend getting a little handheld steamer the day of your wedding and going over your dress the day of to make sure that there's no wrinkles and that it's nice and pressed. And as far as other finishing touches go for your dress, this is where you would want to do any hand sewing or handwork that you might have on your dress. So if there's any lace applique or crystals or embellishment that you want to put on your dress, then obviously now's the time to get out those hand sewing needles and apply them to your final dress. Again, recommend practicing this on your practice muslins. You do not have to fully embellish every practice round that you did. Like, just practice a couple crystals or a couple appliques. It's really all you need on your muslin mock-ups, but really save all your nice embellishments for your final dress. You will do your final fitting. Make sure you have your heels on. Make sure that the hem of the dress is hemmed correctly to your heel height. Do not switch your heels from this point forward, and make sure that the dress is fitting properly. Make sure you're taking into account any weight fluctuations that might have happened, and just make sure that you feel completely beautiful, completely confident, and hopefully your dress is your vision. And if it's not your vision, then you have some time cushioned in here to make some iterations. This is also the time to think about if you want to add a tag to your garment, or if you want to sew anything special into it. So I know some people do the something borrowed, something blue, something new, something old, all of that. So maybe you take a piece of fabric or something, sew it to the inside of the dress where no one can see it but you. I don't know, think about some meaningful options you could do there, and hopefully your dress is your dream dress. If you watched this whole video, I truly am so excited for you. That means that you are motivated and inspired to get up and do this thing. So if you are planning on making your wedding dress, please comment down below so I can cheer you on, so I can answer any questions that you still might have. I will respond to all the comments down below, and I want to thank you all again so much for watching this video. Please, if you liked this video or if you found it helpful, hit the subscribe button. I'm very close to hitting my goal of 1,000 subs. When I say very close, I mean halfway there, but you know what? I'm holding faith. I love you all so much. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you will go over to my channel and watch some of my other creative sewing videos that I have here on YouTube. If you are a bride-to-be, congratulations on this special time in your life, and thank you so much for watching today's video. Until next time, bye y'all.